Welcome to Time Monk Radio. You are listening to Part 9 of the 7 Medicines, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Thank you, Gemini. I hope you've had a green week. When we talked last, we were just finishing up talking about story medicine, which is the second medicine, also known as collect information. And I didn't go into a lot of detail when we were talking about collecting information in terms of where we collect information. But I did, before we left it entirely, want to say that irrational information is as important as rational information. And sometimes people say to me, oh, well, surely you're not suggesting that we do things irrationally. And I'm saying that what we may consider irrational might have a deeper rationality. We all know those times when we've thought, oh, I should da-da-da, or I shouldn't da-da-da, or maybe instead of da-da-da, I should da-da-da. And we've ignored that because we thought, well, that's really irrational. And yet, what came to pass? That perhaps paying attention to that irrational part of ourselves gives us a greater access to our wholeness, so long as that irrational part is not telling us to harm ourselves or others. We definitely draw the line there. But if it says, stop doing this or start doing this, even though others think it seems irrational, it might be okay. And it also means that we are more than free, we're actually encouraged to look into irrational sources of information. What would an irrational source of information be? Well, without meaning to offend anyone at all, I would say a tarot reading or an astrology reading or a palmistry reading or a skull reading or any of those kinds of things which really rely on intuitive connections and not really what we might call a scientific one. And when we were talking about story medicine and about diagnosis, we were very much talking about diagnostic tests and those really kind of rigorous scientific ways of looking at things. So I did want to put in a word for, shall we call it, the other part of ourselves, the part of ourselves that may know something that we need to know but doesn't have any words to talk about it. And I think that this is really important for us to remember, that what we call irrational may simply be something that is unworded or that cannot be expressed merely in words. So when we're looking for a story, looking for a diagnosis, let's pay attention to those kinds of information as well. And that, in a way, certainly helps us segue into the next river, which is the third river, the third medicine. And we could call it by so many different names. In my books, I call this engage the energy. Now, most people seem to have a pretty intuitive understanding of what I mean by energy. In other words, most people don't think that what I'm talking about is somehow hooking people up to a machine that produces some kind of energy, or perhaps as a child might think about it, sticking their fingers into some socket to get energy. Most people are going to, whether they are familiar with the concept of chi or of the kind of energy that is thought of by energy workers or people who use energy medicine, most of us have some sense that there is an energy body, shall we call it, that there is certainly a physical body, but that there is also an energy body. Now, some of my teachers have said that there's an auric body and an etheric body and an energy body and an earthy body and a spiritual body, and some of them will name 7, 8, 9 different kinds of bodies that one has. But in energy medicine, we are talking about that perhaps it is measurable, perhaps we can even use certain ways of seeing it, but that energy field which surrounds each and every living thing. And whether it's a bacteria, a tiny thing smaller than a cell, whether it's an individual cell, or whether it's a whole bunch of cells working together like you or me, each organism has an energy field. And in Russia, they developed a kind of photography called Kirlian photography. And Kirlian photography was said to be able to take a picture of the energy field surrounding things, so that they would take, say, for instance, a Kirlian picture of an entire leaf, and you would see not a picture of the leaf, but a picture of the energy of the leaf. And then they would cut off a piece of the leaf, and they would take another Kirlian photograph of it. And what we might imagine that we would see where the leaf was cut off didn't happen. Once again, you get a picture of the whole plant, that the energy body is still there and is still intact. Certainly it fades as time goes by, we know that. But right after the cutting, the energy body is still there and still intact. So what I was getting at, and what I am getting at in my books, when I say engage the energy, is to join forces with this life force energy. One of the women that I'm fascinated by is Hildegard of Bingen, a woman who lived about 1,000 years ago. And she was a shaman, she was a mystic, she was a nun, she was a composer, she was an herbalist, she was an artist, she was a visionary. She took on, I used to say one pope and someone who loves Hildegard and knows far more about her than I do said, no, she took on 3 popes during her lifetime and won every time. Hildegard of Bingen calls this energy that we're talking about viriditas. Viriditas, the greening force. And here we are at the peak of the greening force here at midsummer. The heat and the green and that life force, that viriditas, that budding force that pushes through all life, that keeps it moving and humming and going along, that kind of energy. We want to engage it. We want to engage with it. We want to make agreements with it. Now, many of my books are translated into German. And my German's not very good, but good enough to, look over some of the major things. And one of the major things that I looked over when my book on breast health, breast cancer, was published in German was the list of the 7 medicines. It's called the 6 Steps of Healing in my books. And I said to them, this word here that comes before energy, what does it mean? Does it mean engage the energy? And they said, no, it means to control the energy or to move the energy the way you want the energy to be moved. And I said, but that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at, what I say, engage the energy, is that we need to come to our work with the energy, honoring ourselves and honoring the energy so that we are equals engaging in a task. Now, will you remember that the first medicine was serenity medicine? and that we are in Serenity Medicine alone and by ourselves. Serenity Medicine is just us, the individual person. And then we move from Serenity Medicine to Story Medicine. And here in Story Medicine, we begin to ask others, do you have a story that you can tell me? As well as asking ourselves, as well as asking irrational sources, do you have a story that you can tell me? And here, when we are engaging the energy, we are working both with what's going on inside our own energy and engaging that energy often through the auspices of someone who is different than us. And we engage. We do not control. We don't try to make life happen the way we envision it to happen. I often jokingly say, no matter how much I affirmed and envisioned that I was going to become a millionaire tomorrow, it would be unlikely. And of course, usually there's someone who quips, but you could get something in the mail that says you're a millionaire, which of course is true and might indeed be the answer to my saying I will be a millionaire tomorrow, but not exactly as we wish. So we don't want to say that we know more than the energy of life as it already exists. And the energy of life as it already exists in me and running through other things is an energy that I can engage with, that I can, without directing, connect to and follow the path or the way of it. And of course, this is another way to talk about engaging the energy, and that is to call it the path or the way or the Tao, the great that is. Now, this may sound like meditation, but this is far more active, and again, our verb engaging. All right? It's not just serenity that we're doing here. We are looking at energy medicine. We're looking at something moving, changing. How are we going to envision this energy? What kind of guise are we going to see it in? How are we going to cause it to manifest, and through that manifestation to give ourselves a way to change our manifestation? I have a favorite story that I tell about engaging the energy, and it's a rather long story, so settle in and get ready to enjoy yourself. I was coming home one day after going to take someone on a weed walk, and I came to a T in the road. My road came to an end, and it came to another road coming across it. There's a stop sign at this intersection, and today there were quite a few cars in queue stopping at the stop sign and then moving into the bigger road. So I stopped, and then I went forward, and I stopped, and then I went forward, and I stopped, and then I went forward, and perhaps then or perhaps one more stop. It was finally my chance to actually be at the stop sign. Now, the road that I was turning onto, whether I turned left or right, was a fairly busy road. Not a big road, still just 2 lanes like the road I was on, but busier than the road I'd been on, and I was turning left. So I was definitely looking left and looking right and looking back to the left again to be sure that I wasn't going to run into anybody or anybody run into me before I turned into this busy highway. Well, no sooner had I found my opening and turned into the highway than in the rearview mirror appeared flashing lights. I pulled over as soon as I could, and a officer came to me and told me that he was writing me a ticket for not stopping at the stop sign. I began to protest and say that not only had I stopped at the stop sign, but I had stopped numerous times at the stop sign. And he said, tell it to the judge. So I had indeed to tell it to the judge on the night when court met in my small town. Now, this was during the summertime, and the night that my court met in my small town, first they did the domestic disputes. And there were the disputes about the dogs who were defecating in the neighbor's lawn, and there were the dispute about the renters who weren't paying rent, and there were the disputes about the firecrackers, summertime, and all other kinds of domestic disputes. And finally we got to the traffic tickets. And the judge draws to him the sheaf of traffic tickets and says, Abigail Adams, you have a summons here for not stopping on Route 32, turning left onto Route 212. How do you plead? And she said, well, I'm pretty sure I stopped. And the judge said, that sounds like guilty to me. Fine, $50, court costs $25. Pay the court clerk over there. Betsy Brown, you have a summons here for failing to stop on Route 32 when turning left onto Route 212. How do you plead? And she said, I always stop. I must have stopped. And the judge says, sounds like guilty to me. $50 fine, $25 court cost. Pay the clerk over there. Kathy Crabb, you have a summons here for failing. You're getting the idea now, aren't you? That one after another, all these drivers were being called up with a ticket just like the one I had. Well, my name is Weed. So you can imagine how far down the line it was. As a matter of fact, when I was called, there was nobody else in the courtroom. Everyone else had been found guilty of exactly the same charge I was being brought up for. And so when the judge asked me how I pled, I looked at him firmly in the eye, planted my feet, and said, not guilty. Well, Judge Shirley couldn't say it sounds like guilty to me because clear as day I had said not guilty. And the judge looked at the cop, and the cop said, she's got to be guilty. And the judge looked at me, and I said, would it be admissible for me to ask this officer some questions? And the judge admitted as how it was admissible. And so I asked the officer what color car I was driving, and the officer didn't know. And I asked the officer what kind of car I was driving, and the officer didn't know. And I asked the officer if my turn signal had been on, and the officer didn't know. And I said to the judge, you know, it's just possible that at the point where I stopped at the stop sign, the officer was distracted by something else. There's simply so much for an officer of the law to keep track of, and perhaps he missed seeing me stop. Well, there wasn't very much that the judge could say. The officer sputtered and said, I don't know what kind of car it was, but it was a foreign car. Oh, my goodness, that's certainly true. The judge looked at the officer, and the judge looked at me and said, I'll decide in my chambers. Court is dismissed, and that was the end of court in our small town that night. Well, now you may be thinking that what I did was to go home and make a spell to win. That would be controlling the energy. No, indeed. We want to engage the energy. So I continued to do what I had been doing all along in terms of spells, and that is to make my favorite spell, especially when you're in an adversarial relationship. And so this spell takes place in 3 parts. Part the first, you state that you exist. I, Susan Weed, exist in the universe. All right. Then you state that the other parties, and you name them specifically and by name, exist in the universe. So da-da-da, da-da-da-da exists in the universe. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da exists in the universe, and so on. And that had to include the officer and the judge in my case. That's the second part. And the third part is there exists a connection between us all that brings about the greatest possible good. So our spell engages the energy. It asserts that I exist, that these people I am being adversarial with exists, and that our connection brings about the greatest possible good. So sure enough, soon there comes in my mailbox the letter from my small town court, and I open it up and it says guilty. I hope you're not too disappointed. I wasn't disappointed at all. Because after all, it is a small town. There's not very many police officers, and, they could give me a ticket every time they saw me and make me go to court over and over again, couldn't they? So that judge, he has to see that police officer probably every week. So what does he say? He can say, I found her guilty. Oh, and the fine? $5. For the greatest possible good, we engage the energy. I'm reminded of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's story about a Quaker who had cancer, and she was very much into visualization. We won't talk more about visualization in one of these talks in an upcoming week. And she said to this Quaker man, you must visualize something that is eating your cancer up and killing it. And he said, I'm a Quaker. I do not envision things that are killing other things. And she said to him, well, then you figure it out. I'll be back in a week. And she says, when she came back in a week, he was doing much better. What did you do? She asked him. I imagined little entities in my blood, he said, that could find the cancer, that could hug it, and that could carry it to a safe place where it would be safe, but it couldn't ever hurt me. That's engaging the energy. What a beautiful image for us all to hold. That when we engage the energy, we are no longer fighting against something, but working with what is. It is said that there's a woman in Japan who has achieved enlightenment, and that people are drawn to her. From far and wide they come, and they seek an audience with her. They seek her blessing, and they seek counsel of her. It is said that she gives everyone the same prayer, everyone the same exercise, which is simply to say something on the order of, and I'm not quoting her, I'm eternally grateful for everything that my life brings me. It is said that those who practice this mantra, who take on this practice, are indeed eternally grateful, but that very few do so. What does it mean in your life to engage the energy? What does it mean when we have an injury or an illness or a trauma or a scary diagnosis to engage the energy? In a very real way, from the wise woman perspective. And we remember that there are three perspectives: the scientific perspective, which measures and fixes; the heroic perspective, which balances and cleanses; and the wise woman perspective, which nourishes the unique wholeness of each being. So when we are engaging with the energy, we are engaging with the wholeness of ourselves and the wholeness of our energy, so that the engagement becomes a reweaving, a rewinding, a remeshing of that which holds it all together. I sometimes see this third river of healing engage the energy as a mesh or a net. I also see it as a trampoline, and when I do, I call it the shaman's playground. I say that the third medicine is as broad as the human imagination. How many ways can we imagine to play with ourselves, to play with the energy? How many ways can we manifest and bring into form things that we wish to engage with that help us engage with the energy? Some of the ones that we are going to be talking about in the coming weeks include face medicine, hand healing, the placebo effect, vibrational medicine including music, sound, and color, homeopathy, flower essences, gemstone elixirs, talismans, mind medicine, affirmations, visualizations, prayers, and spells. So we are going to enjoy ourselves exploring the shaman's playground. And I think this is a good place for us to remember something that I said in our beginning talks about these 7 medicines and why it was that I found myself compelled to create this system and to talk about it. And that is because I saw people coming to one river, and especially this one river, and trying multiple ways of being in this river. I just mentioned a whole lot of them, right? Homeopathy, hand healing, placebos, music healing, color healing, flower essences, prayers, visualizations, so many different options here at the third medicine that people I saw moving in to this medicine and sampling various things and finding none of them to work, and then throwing up their hands and saying, alternative medicine doesn't work. I'm going to go get drugs. I'm going to go have surgery. And my thinking to myself, wait. There's 7 medicines, and only 2 of them are drugs and surgery. There are 5 other medicines. You've just been playing in one. You might think that doing all these different things is 5 different medicines, but we're here to see how these things all basically work in the very same way, and that is by changing the energy, which is not something to be scoffed at. There are many who believe that first we are energy beings, and that from that energy the physical parts of ourselves manifest. And if we can change that energy being, then we can also change those physical parts of ourselves. This is what the miracles are, isn't it? We're here in the land of miracles. The third medicine could also be called miracle medicine. Here we open ourselves to the possibility of the miracle. Any of this strike a chord with you, Gemini?
Yes, it certainly does.
Have you found yourself using any of the medicines in the third river?
Well, I have played with energy and allowed energy and experimented with auras for about 15 years now.
Aha! So this
Yes.
is something indeed that's quite close to you.
Very close.
Do you find that most people can see auras?
No, I don't find that, but I find that most people feel energy when I work with them or do some like play in their, I guess, their ethereal they can very much feel it, but not often do I find people that can see auras, or maybe they don't realize what they're seeing.
I very much agree with you. I think because we're a very visual culture that we use the word see, but that most people don't. They have a proprioceptive sensation of it.
And then when I discuss feeling plant energy, then most people cannot relate to that unless they work with plants. They find that very interesting and slightly crazy.
There is something slightly crazy about the third medicine. And that's why I started by talking about even gathering information from slightly crazy or slightly irrational sources.
It's wonderfully crazy to me.
It is indeed. Well, let's pick up right where we are when we come back next week, shall we?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Green blessings, everyone.
This concludes part 9 of our discussion on the 7 medicines the Wise Woman Way with Susan Wheat at Time Monk Radio.